And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today MLS SuperDraft Special with Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer live on the floor. Jonathan, how you doing today?
On the floor, literally about to fall over on me. Running around too much.
There you go. Busy day as always down there. Jonathan, real quick, I think that the story of this year's draft really has just been how willing and how many trades there have been for draft picks down. 5 of the top 10 picks were sold outright for money. Does that sort of just underline this point that the kings of MLS right now are allocation or GAM and TAM? That's what people want, and the draft picks are just a way to get some of that?
Well, they are, and to top it off, the Union have no draft picks today. And, they're introducing 2 homegrown players, and that's all they're doing. Or I thought that was all they're doing, but Paul Tenorio, as I was coming on air, just gave me quite some work to do. Chicago has traded David Accam to the Union for over $1 million in allocation.
Oh, dear. Okay, there you go.
Wow.
So I might only be on here for 5 minutes instead of 10 minutes.
No problem. David Accam to Philadelphia from the Fire for $1 million of allocation money.
Yeah,
wow.
That's the word.
All right. Well, that brings us to my question, Jonathan. Quickly.
Speaking of blockbuster trades, by the way.
Go ahead.
That I've been reporting on this week. I know that was something else potentially topic.
Yeah, maybe Jonathan will get you on next week to talk about that stuff. I know you're going to be busy there. Kevin, go ahead with your question quick.
I was just going to ask, trades, a lot of trades today, a lot of trades for allocation. Are you expecting something more to happen today in the sense of a trade? Are we going to see maybe a player trade today from any of the team that you've encountered?
I don't think so at this point. I mean, I don't know what the second-round draft picks are really worth.
No.
Not much.
Well, $75,000 is what TFC just got for the final pick of the first round. Jonathan, look, I'll let you go after this. Quick hot take on the trade that you've just learned about.
Well, the Union needed a winger, and I think they've got one. And as I'm talking to you, I'm trying to chase down the Union's yard guy, and here he is. Yes or no?
Yeah, no comment.
No comment. Live radio, no comment. Let's see.
Is it really live radio?
I'm on the phone with the radio. Yeah.
We have no comment at this time. Thank you.
No comment, fellas. There it is.
Well, no comment at this time, and we'll see if anything goes down in the next few minutes while we are live on the air. Jonathan, what's your thought overall so far in round 1?
I thought Thomas Hilliard-Arce was going to go number 1, and he didn't. So I think the Galaxy might have done all right. I think that LAFC might have made a little bit of a mistake with that.
Yeah, and we'll see LAFC getting a lot of defenders today. Your thoughts maybe on a move from a Montreal Impact, getting a lot of money for their draft pick in the first round. Is it something that you were expecting?
Well, I'm not surprised. I don't know how much Remy Gard cares about it. So.
All right, Jonathan, always difficult, very busy for you. We appreciate your brief time today.
You guys had hell of a timing. I did not expect that to happen.
Neither did we, but it was actually quite amazing.
Yeah.
All right, we'll touch base next week.
We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Talk to you soon, Jonathan. All right. Thank you, Jonathan, for your time. Anyways, that was quite amazing, Duane. By the way, reported by Paul Tenorio as we speak. No confirmation from the head of PR of the Philadelphia Union live on the air. No comments at the moment, but apparently, allegedly, David Accam traded from the Chicago Fire to the Philadelphia Union.
Yeah, that's the most significant news of the afternoon by far, and obviously, anytime you have a known asset, this is my take on this always, and this is my take on drafts in general. If you can get a known asset for your draft pick, you should. And I know that goes counter to what some people like to think about drafts and held as in such high regard by a lot of people that follow other sports. But to me, if you know what you're going to get out of the pick, then take it if you can, because that's all this is about, a draft. It's about getting assets. It's about getting things that are going to make your team better. And if you can use, I mean, I know this wasn't a draft pick at select today, but in a general sense, that's always better than the unknown. And the unknown can be the young player or the allocation. But if you know, I think it says something that we didn't see any players move 4 picks though, right? It was all about money today.
But
and that's the story.
No, exactly. It's Tam and Gam getting traded very often in round one, and then you're looking at the amounts, right? That's what's interesting now with the semblance of transparency that there seems to be more openly now with MLS and Major League Soccer. The amount that is being traded for draft picks or for players or for Gam and Tam. And you see some teams are better negotiators than others. Some teams are able to get more for a lesser draft pick than others. Just Montreal as an example. Good on Adam Braz. I guess Adam Braz is a fine poker player, able to negotiate his hand a little better than others. Fourth pick overall for Montreal, sold for $200,000 of general allocation money. And when you see the third draft pick by DC United was traded for $150,000. So yeah, one pick lower, $50,000 more. Good deals, I think, for Montreal with Adam Braz getting more maybe than he should have, or maybe more than the actual value for their fourth and seventh pick in the round one.
Yeah, look, I tweeted out, and I stand by this, that I think Montreal did some good business today. Now, the caveat I'll give you that is that we're only halfway done. You got the money, now you have to spend the money. And you know, we've seen it in the before with many teams that have traded a lot of picks for allocation. And, you know, I remember a TFC draft a few years ago. I think that it might have been the first one. I'm not too sure. It was a Kevin Payne year. So, no, I was still podcasting then, but I think it was something that's called football. I mixed the years up now. I forget even when we started, Kevin. But 4 years ago now, I guess. Anyway, it all blends.
2018? We started in 2014, Duane. So it's 4 years ago.
Yeah, so I don't know whether we were doing the draft when Kevin Payne traded all those picks up and down, or whether that was still ICF. I don't even know. It's my mind's blurring here. But but yeah, when that happened, everyone was like, "Oh, TFC won the draft because they got all this money," and then they spent all this money on candy and popcorn, basically. So it didn't work out for them in the end. Look, the Impact need to spend the money properly. That's going to be the key. But I do think that they illustrated that, you know, pretty bluntly, that a lot of they are in the line of thinking that a lot of teams are, that the way forward in this league is going to be Tam and Gam and finding those players outside of that. And the Impact got a lot of that. And but on the same regard, and look, the Whitecaps picked a player. I'm not going to pretend that I know a lot about that player. We'll try and find more about him. We'll talk about him on Monday's show for sure. But for me to sit here and tell you about all the assets that this guy brought, I sent out his mixtape on Twitter if you want to watch it for what those things are worth.
And you always have to be careful with highlights, Duane, because they're never showing their blunders, right? They're never showing the one time that they missed the guy and the guy went away on a breakaway and scored, right? They don't show those moments. But one thing I want to go back on, and we did have a chance to go deep with Jonathan on that, it's the fact that a lot of Gam and Tam are being traded, but what does it mean in the long run? And there's a lot of talk with Matthew Doyle and on the actual broadcast show of the draft, how you have unknown assets versus known assets. You have variables, and you have potential versus the now, and versus you can use that money to buy a contract down, maybe of a player that you already have and you want to keep, or a player that's coming in, depending on how long ago he signed his contract or not. There's some restrictions with Gam and Tam, but you do have the sense that teams are going for the known variable versus the potential of a college player, and the fact that a lot of prospects sign a lot younger homegrown contracts before they even get to the point where they enter the SuperDraft from the college level. So that's the talking point in my mind today.
No, as I said, known assets are always better than unknown assets, and I think that's the bottom line with this. You know, the one thing that 16 or 17, you never know. I tend to think there's as much luck involved with that, or development after the fact, which is, you know, a key component to it as well, than there is scouting. But nonetheless, there are going to be a few players there. That said, for, you know, as I said, to go back to the Whitecaps pick, for us to sit here and talk about it would be disingenuous. We just simply don't know. We don't cover the college game high enough. We'll talk to people over the weekend. We'll figure it out, and we'll get our informed opinion at that time. But for now, we can talk in generalities. And in fact, the Whitecaps are on the clock right now as I watch this live for the 26th pick, and they seem to be taking a long time there. So who knows whether they're trying to dump that for some money themselves. Now we'll find out.
They called the timeout. They called the timeout because there's no clock in the bottom, so they called for a timeout. So that's interesting in itself. So far, timeouts have not necessarily always led to trade. Look at the Galaxy. And I think that's another talking point here. You call for a timeout with draft pick number 2, and you don't make that trade. You pick Thomas Hilliard him, number 2 pick.
Sure.
You pick him.
Yeah.
So are we expecting a trade to happen in the next few minutes, days? Because there might be the groundwork for the trade, just didn't have the time to get it done, even with that timeout. And maybe you just decide to pick him and see what you can do in the next few days. Look at last year. That's what happened. So is it what's going to happen with the second pick, Thomas Hilliard-Ince?
Yeah, well, Jack Harrison is the pick.
Yes.
And by the way, Lucas Stauffer was just picked by the Whitecaps. Again, no clue. I'm not even going to pretend.
He's a defender.
Then,
I know that because it says a D between parentheses. So he's a defender.
I can't even see his college. What college did he go to? Anyway,
He went to. I just missed it. Sorry, small font.
It doesn't matter.
I don't have good eyes.
You can Google it. At any rate, yeah, we'll see. We're seeing his highlight reel right now. He's certainly making some crushing tackles and some great shots down the line. He's in the Big East, so he was an Eastern team. The Blue is I don't know, whatever. Interesting, I guess, to go back to the Galaxy thing. Yeah, with the Jack Harrison trade a few years ago, where he was selected and then traded, selected by Chicago, I believe, and then traded to New York. Then, that certainly went down immediately in that particular case. But yeah, they absolutely could have had a talk to a certain moment and went sort of agreed in principle to continue to work the details out and then just selected the player. You'd hope in that case that they would tell the player immediately. But yeah, that would be how that would play out. And look. I look at what Minnesota has done. They have selected a lot of players here, and I think that's an indication of a team that had lacked serious depth last year, that made a lot of mistakes in building that club and just needs to get a whole bunch of warm bodies together so that they can start to try and build that. If they pick 4 or 5 guys, they probably think 1 or 2 might stick down the line.
And with not that much money spent compared to last year on players that actually don't play the Demidov of this world, right? You want Minnesota to be maybe a bit more, well, not necessarily stingy, but at least careful with their money this year and get some value. Because if you're Minnesota, you have to be realistic. You're not going to win in 2018, right? And you're not going to, you need a 3 to 5 year plan, and you need to basically scratch 2017. Not that it was as terrible as expected. We were I remember that 9 points prediction. Yeah, it was a lot higher than that, but there was a lot of mistake done on how some players were signed or not and the amount that those players were signed for. And you want 2018 to kind of reflect those mistakes and learn from them and maybe not give away contracts to players that won't actually play and that are into 6 figures.
Yeah, I maintain that 9-point prediction would have been correct had they not made the changes they needed to make at that particular part of the season. They were
Sam
horrific
Cronin?
to start the year.
You're mentioning of Sam Cronin, basically, right?
Yeah, they traded Sam Cronin and moved out, I forget his name off their terrible signing there.
Demidov.
The Ukrainian dude. Yeah, thank you. It's forgettable, right? So anyway, yeah.
Well, they would love to forget about that, yes.
Once those moves were made, they were able to sort of function as just a normal bad MLS team as opposed to an historically bad one. A lot of work to be made there. LAFC I think is interesting too, that they got those 2 picks in the top 3 and didn't move the top pick. There was some suggestion that they would. It's a club that has made noise about wanting to bring in big name players with Hernandez seemingly available now as well, and sort of a nice fit there in a lot of people's minds. You would think they'd be looking for money to do that, but yet they chose to keep those players. Again, I think you might have to look at that as a depth move, that LAFC has gone and looked at their roster and said, well, yeah, we've had some splashes here and we have some good talent here, but we only have 9 players and we're under contract. We need some more bodies.
Yeah.
So
well, it was I think it was 12 just before the draft today, the amount of player under contract. But Duane, I can't get it out of my mind. David Accam to Philadelphia. If it happens, still no confirmation, still no official word from the union, but it's happening.
Did you hear how stressed that PR director was?
Oh my Lord. When he heard the word live radio, he was like, oh really? Oh, what do you mean? Live radio? Okay. And then he gets close to the phone. I wish we could have seen it on video, right? So Jonathan walks by. He talks to him. He's like, yo, live radio. I was like, okay, no comments for now. No comments.
We have no comments at this time. Yeah, it leaked before they thought it would. Yeah, that's generally speaking. If they laugh and kind of are more casual about it, then it's completely laughable to them. But when they sort of are in panicked voice mode and running around and quickly shooting down any comment, it means that they haven't contacted the player yet, and that's what's happening. So there you go. $1 million.
It's true. But well, it's true because in my experience, the one time where I was told something before it was time and was told, okay, don't release the news until this time, like this it was an embargo basically, and we because the player was not made aware of the situation. So yeah, it's probably what happened today. David, if you're listening, David Acam, guess what? You're going to Philly.
Yeah, well, it's out there now. Paul tweeted it, then there you go. But look, $1 million, if this happens, that's a significant move, and it sort of continues that trend we saw with Duane last year, with MLS willing to sort of move that allocation in like inside the league better. And it speaks, I think, a little bit to and they talked about it at the Dwyer time, that one of the reasons you're going to see more in this is teams are figuring out that selling these players on doesn't make sense outside the league, because the league takes some of that allocation back, and until I think that means the league is going to need to address that if they want to sell their players on.
Well, that's the thing, right? They maintain more of that 1 million trade in MLS than outside, right? They maintain in the entirety of that million compared to when you sell it outside of Major League Soccer. Say an example, a Kyle Larin to Besiktas. Okay, let's use a topical example. If it's 1.5, where Orlando might only see maybe 900K, even if it's to that point, and it cannot even always be used on players themselves. So you have less restrictions with that $1 million of allocation in league than that 1.5 that technically coming out of league to Major League Soccer and then redistribute to your club.
Fair enough. I'm distracted right now. We're about to see Josie Altidore win the MLS Cup, and there we go. Anyway, yeah, no, absolutely, that's the way to do it. The highlights of TFC were just on there because TFC's on the clock. You keep all the money, and I think that there's an easy solution to this for Major League Soccer. Is it to start to slowly loosen those gaps? Well, not even slowly, to start to more quickly loosen the single entity sort of mechanisms out there. And if they start to do more of that, then any complaints that they're having from outside can start to whittle away a little bit. And one easy way to do that is to allow clubs to maintain and spend the money that they gain by selling these players on. Now, I guess I understand that MLS pays a salary, and so in that regards, there needs to be some type of sharing of the revenue that comes in from that player. But MLS is not spending the money on the development side of things. So when you're building a player up, from either when you bring them in as a young player or from academy up, you deserve, I think, more than 2/3 and 1/2 that you currently get in that allocation, and you won't see these teams sort of shifting around. And like you can argue too, like is it good to keep them in the league? In which case, then maybe they want to encourage that. But I think that in some levels, you've got to make it easier for teams to sell. And you look at the Lawrence situation right now. Hell, earlier on in the draft, they were putting him still in Orlando's lineup on the MLSsoccer.com broadcast, and that's silly. He's clearly going to be gone, and it's clearly a shame that they have to fight the way that they do to try and move him on, because I don't think it gives a great reputation for the league. We'll see who TFC picks, if they pick here in a minute. It's taking an awfully long time again, so maybe they get more money. Real quick,
timeout. I don't know. They only have one timeout, so I guess they're on the clock, but just round 2 maybe 3, maybe even 3. Who knows? No, well, TFC 3 is a little too low. TFC 2, welcome Tim Kubel.
The average age of TFC 3, by the way, guys, if you don't know, is about 15 or 16. So yeah,
it's literally the academy team.
Yeah, well, it's the League One Ontario team is what the TFC 3 is.
Well, unfortunately, it's hard for me to say from Montreal, but we're number 27. I have a little something with number 27. So, Tim, you might be my favorite player in TFC already.
All right, there you go. Quickly on the TFC, I think that it is a nice piece of business to get money from Minnesota. It kind of worked for both teams because they needed the warm bodies, as we said.
Hey,
and
thanks,
TFC,
Minnesota.
50,000 at TAM, which tells me they're in the TAM market right now if they're collecting TAM, right? I would suggest that they're probably looking to buy an outside back to replace Betashore. That would Hassler is a good option. I think he's an attacking option, but I think he's a backup. So you go out and you take that TAM money, you address the area of the team that is probably the weakest right now, which is the outside backs, based on Beta Shore leaving and losing Edwards in the expansion draft. And you use some of that TAM to sort of address that hole in what is otherwise still a pretty damn strong lineup. So you got to give Tim Bezrachenko and TFC credit for getting some money for an asset that probably wasn't going to yield them anything in terms of immediate help on the outside. So they've taken, long-term warm body, that they would have got with the 23rd overall pick, got some money for that, probably got an equivalent player at 28. So you got to give them credit for being able to do that. The Whitecaps, as I said, we'll try and get some more information on these players and talk in more depth about them later on, but not much to say right now. Lastly, on the...
Well, there's one thing I wanted to talk to you about, and it's something that's not really talked about a lot of places, but us being independent as we are and having the editorial choice to address this situation, there was an attempt by Major League Soccer's security personnel to suppress some Save the Crew chants that were going on the supporters part of the floor of MLS draft today.
Yeah, certainly lots of reputable people, including Jonathan Tannenwald, reported this happened, so this isn't just speculation happening out there. Basically, during the early part of the draft, and I believe it was the Union supporters, the
Sons of Ben.
Sons of Ben.
But there was others. There were others as well. It was not just the Sons of Ben's, and there was many different. And then at the end, Don Garber decided to, you know what? If there's no expletive chance, let them have their say.
Well, yeah, because I think he quite rightly understood that. Basically, MLS tried to shut it down, and then social media caught a hold of it, and quickly everyone was pushing back, saying, like, come on, man. And look, what's MLS going to do there? They're going to kick them out of the draft, and then basically what is not going to get reported wildly outside of people like us gets reported, because suddenly there are 50 fans that are kicked out because they're singing against this move.
It would have created a scene, literally. Would have not go down, like, easily. It would have not gone down well. Like, guys, you have to leave. What? Okay, you thought we were singing loud then? Wait till we get kicked off. Wait till we're singing our arse off on the way off,
If there's a supported motion idea amongst supporters across the league and I shouldn't say that. There's probably 10 or 20% that are very pro-business oriented in their outlook of life that think, oh, whatever, free market, blah, blah, blah. But the vast majority of soccer fans look at this and see it as a betrayal of the social contract, which makes it matter. The reason soccer, sports matters is because we let it matter. It has no intrinsic value in our lives other than the emotional attachment that we give to it. So if you play with emotions of fans like this, you run the risk long-term of eroding confidence in your product. It is dumb for teams or leagues to turn a blind eye to that. They think that they can do this forever and ever and ever, but we're looking at declining ratings and declining interest in sports, especially amongst the younger generation. And I don't think that this is the only reason for that, but it's part of it. And I think that sports leagues need to start to reevaluate how they operate sometimes. And this would be a really glaring example of how. That might have been a little too deep for a Friday afternoon, but there you go, Kevin. Hey, Greg Vanny's on the phone.
It's a super draft, so it could be super deep, and that's super fine with Super Me.
Exactly. All right, Kevin, I look, one last thought on the draft and TFC's approach in particular. I do think that when you have the two teams, you do have the advantage of being able to draft at a USL level. And I make this joke a lot that it's the USL draft. But I think that in Toronto's case, drafting someone to make the USL team better, even if that player doesn't eventually make TFC, is still the right move, because I think when you're looking at your young players, if they're just getting killed week after week, and we talk about this when we talk about USL in season, it's not necessarily for the best. It's not necessarily good for development. Winning for, training to win is the fourth component of the long-term player development model, right? We always forget that. We get hung up on this, like the lower age, train for skill.
The trophy for everyone.
Matters.
Yeah.
Training to win is the final component of LTBD. So I think that when you're talking about TFC2's struggles on the pitch and the fact that there haven't been a ton of players move up, Raheem Edwards being a notable example, maybe they need to start to strengthen that USL team. And if you approach the draft with a player in mind that might be a little older, that might be a little bit more, that might not have a high ceiling but might be already USL ready, I think that's a good approach. And I don't know whether this player they picked at 28 is, but that's how I would approach the TFC draft. Kevin?
Tim Betspachenko himself said that last year. You asked him that, and that's what he said. Or somebody else asked me, I can't remember. But there was that person who asked the question was saying, Tim, having now TFC2 part of the pyramid of Toronto FC, does it change how you approach a draft? Does a long shot become maybe more attainable, or can you actually viable? Like, is it viable to go for a long shot when you have a better place for him to develop, and maybe him having the time at that USL level team, not taking a spot of the roster of the first team, and me not having that pressure to output a performance in a short amount of time, having time to develop, that's something having back in your mind when you do a draft too as well. So a long shot that maybe other teams wouldn't do if you don't have that infrastructure. Maybe that explains a lot of the decision as well from the Montreal Impact side. Look, they don't have a USL team, so a fourth and seventh pick in the first round, the value of them, or the value of what they can do with TAM and GAM, looking at their networks of contacts in the world of football abroad, maybe they feel they can do better with that money, and that explains as well one of the reasoning behind the two trades that Montreal did with Dallas and Minnesota in the first round is, look, we don't have a USL team, so even if we draft one of those college players, we don't necessarily have the time and space on our roster for him to flourish, so might as well just get some money.
Well, exactly. All right.
So it's circling back around to GAM and TAM and having a USL team or not, and makes a big difference of what those teams have or not done today. Look at Minnesota.
Right. It's been officially announced what Jonathan broke there. It was 900,000 as opposed to $1 million.
300
going back the other way.
It's 300 of GAM and 900 of TAM. David Accam is going to Philadelphia for 900 of TAM and 300 of GAM, or the other way around. It disappeared off my screen, but it's 1.2 of aggregated
total allocation.
Yeah, total allocation. There you
go. That if it is 900 TAM, and that's what I think it was, then certainly you'd have to think that Chicago has a player in mind already that they're going to bring in. So we'll look for that announcement to come quickly. Yeah, interesting trade there. We'll obviously allow to digest that a little bit more going in, but we've it works. They needed wing players, and they've got one now. Chicago, that's a loss, but if you have to wait to see who they bring in to replace that, you would hope it's not like just use the TAM to like re-sign Schweinsteiger to another deal or something, because I think that'd be wrong.
Did, so I don't know if they needed that money or not. He's already a DP, so is it that really important? That's the thing, right? You're a DP, so it's already $500K. What does it really matter, the rest?
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Well,
Duane.
That's an interesting one there. I wanted quickly come before. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but the Canadian women's under-20 team is currently in qualifying. I did watch the game yesterday. You can look back on my feed to get some of my takes on that. But real TLDR of it, for those that are interested in that. First off, we'll obviously give these guys coverage. I'll watch the games over the weekend. We'll get Kevin some highlight packages if he's working, and we'll make sure we can talk about it with some authority. But it's the Jordan Heinemann show. Basically, it's the Canadian women's team. They're doing a lot of old school, get it down to the wings, cross it into the big, strong forward, and against Costa Rica, a 3-1 win there to open the tournament, which is pretty much going to guarantee them a spot at the World Cup, where you have a choice whether you're going to bring Diana Rose and Jessie Fleming into that U20 program, or whether you think that they're past that at this point. Because if you put those two players on there with Heinemann there as well, you could have a very interesting-looking Canada team at that. But right now,
if it's about winning, that game, you just mentioned long-term player development. It's about winning. Why not? What's going to change? Yes, there's the actual World Cup in 2019, but there's still time. So I would hope so. Jessie Fleming is part of that team when it comes down to.
Yeah. They certainly have a lot of attacking power. It'd be very interesting to watch what they could do at a World Cup with those three players. And I think for the Canadian program, winning a World Cup, and that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the women's side, even at a youth level, would be something that they could use to really sort of change public perception around them a lot more. Although there's not a big problem with the women's perception, although the local news lately, or sort of recent news, might make that something they should think about. Well, we'll have to see. We'll watch that one carefully. A lot of shakiness at the back, and the questions with selection going in were a lot of people that follow the women's game at college questioned some of the exclusions from the Canadian roster a great deal. There weren't lots to silence them in that first game. They looked pretty shaky, particularly on the Costa Rica goal, which was just 2 mistakes in a row. It was a bad read of a ball in, and then a terrible back pass that led to Costa Rica scoring. But once Canada got rolling in that second half and fatigue kicked in, especially with the size and strength up front, Costa Rica was just overwhelmed. And as I said, this should be enough. That should have been enough to get them through as well. They still have to play the game against the crossover. It's likely the number 2 team in the other group, which will likely be Mexico. And that's going to be interesting. The second game in the group, and the U.S. plays at 5:30 tonight. For those that are interested in watching that, you can find it on the CONCACAF streams. It's decent level football. It's the worst way to spend a couple hours. So we'll watch that game tonight probably and move from there. All right, Kevin. All right. Any final thoughts on the draft, or otherwise maybe I'll finally go get my pizza that I've been looking to get for the last 2 hours as I watch the draft.
Go get your slice of pizza. Make it a pepperoni for me, and maybe a little bit of hot sauce on the side, just in case it's not really that tasty. That's what happens.
Brooklyn style.
Yeah,
Brooklyn style for the win.
Yeah, but why aren't you?
I'm a big Brooklyn guy. David
Accam, Chicago. He's not in Chicago anymore, but I can go for some deep dish right now. Giordano's. I'm looking at you right now, and I'm like, I'm team Brooklyn. You're team deep dish. There you go. There you have it. There we go. Now you know where we fall on the pizza debate. And until Monday for all the ramification of the draft and the further rounds, and if there's other trades, let's not forget the big thing that happened today, and we learned it live at the same time as Jonathan Tannenwald right here on the show earlier on, is David Accam, a trade from Chicago to Philly for $300 of general allocation money, $300,000 that is, and $900,000 of TAM. And until Monday morning for Duane Rollins, you can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. We say, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.